are so many questions that do exist. And with almost any statement that's made, a myriad of questions can be almost asked. And the reason for that is because the formulation of an idea in terms of a structure, in terms of its details, in terms of understanding how things are developed and so forth, is really fully worked out. In so many ways, people are thrown out with ideas. And like you sort of have this idea thrown out as if it is, the gospel truth. This is the black and white truth, and it's black and it's clear cut, and so forth and so forth. And the fact that this idea, even if it's legitimate, is built upon a variety of assumptions. So to truly fully understand the idea, you have to understand the assumptions that you're accepting and getting at that idea, and how it's developed, and so forth and so forth, is really, it's never really presented. So a person hears an idea, they don't understand the various factors or elements that are necessary to accept in order to support that idea. And therefore, questions emerge because people aren't really looking at the ideas. They're not really looking at the underlying assumptions. And they're never really fully investigated. They're never really fully presented or supported or explained and so forth. So a lot of times I find out when you throw out an idea, person has a lot of questions on those ideas, but the reason they have a lot of questions on them is because no one has ever dealt with the depth that's underneath the idea, and then what does the idea lead to, and it really becomes a problem. It really becomes a problem because so many questions erupt, and the reason you don't fully deal with the questions is because each one of those questions is opening up an investigation of each one of the assumptions that leads to that idea or led to the idea. So it's a very thorough process to deal with things, and people are just sort of like. And what happens is that you have so many questions. Take an idea like let's say like freedom of religion, okay? Or let's be a little bit more. Let's look at an example that is very topical nowadays. Terrorism. Look at terrorism. Especially, let's say, terrorism that is somewhat tied to Islam, Islamic terrorism. And by the way, I'm not in that way slamming all of Islam. Okay? But you look at, well, let's say what happened in Belgium. And I'm watching various people's responses to what happened in Belgium or to Turkey and so forth. And I'm watching responses to responses to responses to responses, and everyone gets really, really upset. And, it's like, this thing leads to more anti-Israel perspectives. Other people is wondering, why aren't people more pro-Israel? If they see terrorism, why aren't they more pro-Israel? How is it that terrorism actually cause people to be anti-Israel?
And most people don't even relate to Israel with terrorism.
No,
their own world.
But the fact is that they may not. If they do, then there's one response. Other people just ignore what's happening in Israel. It's like they don't see how the terrorism here is connected to that terrorism. Then you look at situations where people get upset that the Palestinians are speaking about their terrorists as martyrs, and saying, "Hey, they're naming parks after these terrorists." What do you know, like, doesn't show how wrong it is. And other people say, "Well, what do you expect?" They of course they will. And you look at all these different factors, how people are responding. So here you have a group of individuals who are praising terrorists. Here you have a group of individuals who are attacking terrorists, but only these terrorists, not other terrorists. And then you have the Taliban hates ISIS, but they both do the same thing, suicide bombing. And people can't tell the distinction. And you throw so many things into the mix.
Got to be politically correct.
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly. So what's really going on? See, it really leads to this issue what you say about politically correct. See, I just look at this and saying, what's the underlying assumption? What's really going on that leads to these various different perspectives? So I saw a headline, I think it was on CNN, that no one is born this evil. Speaking about one of the terrorists, I think one of the terrorists in Belgium or Paris or whatever. No one is ever born that evil. Okay? And what does that mean? What does that mean, and what are you saying about terrorism with such a statement? Now that's the kind of statement that would be perceived as politically correct. People are really good, and what? So, how do people become terrorists then? Okay. So.
But wouldn't a child eat something poisonous unless it was stopped? How can you say that people are born? I don't.
So you're saying no.
Yeah.
People can be born so evil.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, they have inclinations that they're born with. There's traits.
Yeah, and one of those traits is go kill people.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, but you could see aggression, like if you walk around young children, you
Right.
can see that some are more aggressive than others.
Okay, so therefore you're going to start talking about, so some are so some are more evil than others if you find aggression is evil.
I'm not saying it's evil,
What's
I'm
the
saying
effect?
that it's there. Everyone has predisposition for it.
Okay.
But from early age you could see already from age of maybe 2
Okay.
how some children are more predisposed than others.
Okay.
Depends what you're exposed to also, no?
Not
Right, you're
necessarily.
saying
They could come from similar households.
You could
yet
be raised
you could
similar,
see-
you're saying, and just have one is more the character this way or another. What
Yeah.
about
So-
the nature of the
So
person?
you're getting into, what you're getting into is a famous psychological argument of nature versus nurture. Right? You're beginning, does a person learn traits, or does a person inherently have those traits? Okay, and we go back and forth between this argument and that argument, and then there usually is a mixture of two things that happen. Okay? And this leads to the argument that someone has this or someone doesn't have this, and so forth. The fact is that, to me, that's not the real question. Okay? This argument between nature and nurture has been a major argument in psychology since the 1800s. Okay? There are people who said that everything is learned, and there's people who say everything is inherent. Okay? The real question is, why do people take sides on it? Okay, why is it that one person sits there and says it's more tied to nature, and why is it some people say it's more tied to nurture?
Because that's how they relate themselves to the other
First
side
of all,
So what and why
the
do
perspective that people have is based on their own perspective.
and how do they get their own perspective?
By being who they are, basically, like
Through?
Sorry?
Through nature or nurture?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So the fact is you're basically saying that if you believe you're born a certain way, then and one of those attributes that say you're born a certain way also tell you how you look at life. And other people say if you're brought up a certain way, then other people will say You will learn this way.
I'm saying that it's easy to spot in someone else what's already familiar, like within a person themselves. Like if you're...
Yeah, but how do you know whether the way you are is because of nature or nurture?
Who you are? It's
Yeah.
a combination of two things.
Yeah, so how do you know which has dominant? How do you know which one? So
You don't know. You can assume that it's both.
okay, so why do
factors.
you take a position on it? What I'm saying is that people take positions on this. Why do they take those positions? Why are people more going towards nature than nurture? Why do they take such positions?
Wait,
See, let me-
what about
let-
this? What
yeah.
about science? Have they done any studies
Yeah,
on like why
Totally.
a person's mind or like reacts those
yeah.
different
That's
ways?
why you have an argument in psychology, because you go back.
So there's research in that.
Yeah,
So
and you have
what do they
arguments
say?
both ways.
What do they say? Yeah,
We
science.
have arguments both ways.
In the science research.
Right.
Like,
Right. You have a lot of arguments both ways.
It could also have to do with a bit of a general predisposition, like general.
Yeah. Okay.
views,
But let me point out something. What I'm really questioning is, why do we care?
Why do we care?
Yeah. See, let me step back for a sec. There's something there's a certain place I want to go, and I want to let me make it more direct of how to get there. There are three possible ways of looking at someone who does something that you define as evil. Okay? I'm going to throw out three possible ways. Okay? One possible way is the person knows that they're doing evil and likes it. Okay? They have a drive to do this. Right? I know it belongs to you. I like it. I want to satisfy myself, and I really don't give a hoot about you. That usually is a nice, simple definition of evil. And when we deal with that, then we have a simple response. What do you want to do to someone like that? You want to punish that person. Why? You'd like to, take him out and so forth and so forth. Usually when we encounter people who are evil, it's usually the way we want to define the person. So for example, the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, we would like to see them as totally scum, right? These people are basically just into their own hedonism, their own self enjoyment, and they just want to basically, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's all they want to do, right? Okay, and they're sadists and so forth and so forth. Okay? Now, people have a real problem with something, though. The thing that people have a real problem is that Hitler, Yimach Shemo, was a vegetarian. Okay? And in many ways, Hitler did not really threw a lot of people off by not being such a hedonist. Okay? And that really that breaks the issue that he's just into his own self-pleasure or his own self-objective. Okay, but the fact is, before we get into that problem, the first thing is people want to sit there and say some people just are evil. Good. And that's what they're into. Then there's other people who don't mind that some people are just born evil. So they basically argue, and this is where you get an argument where people say no one is born so evil, like in that CNN headline. Is then people sit there and say, must be that the person had such a terrible experience that he was forced to do this evil. He became because he was in such a terrible situation. This eventually led to this type of evil. Okay. Okay, now let me point out something to you. The second definition is the classic definition of the root of terrorism by the founder of modern terrorism, which is a guy by the name of Frantz Fanon.
Why is he the modern terrorist?
Okay, because Frantz Fanon wrote a book in response to Algeria, where the concepts of terrorism began. He basically said, we want to get rid of the French. It's terrible having the French in Algeria.
He wrote this book?
Yeah, it's a book. There's a book called The Wretched of the Earth. I think that's the name of his book, by Fanon. And Fanon basically said, when people feel so oppressed, right, then they'll do anything because of the pain that they're under.
It's a huge problem with it because there are many cases when they were brought up well and educated and never experienced hardships.
Right.
And they still join the...
Right. And that's true. That's a challenge against it. But the fact of the matter is what my point is before you get to the challenge, understand that even one person like this means that Fanon's theory is a possible theory. The fact is that that's where you get into problems when you start saying everyone or everyone. Fanon presents one thing. In other words, I'm giving you two reasons for people doing evil things. One thing is that they simply have a drive for self-interest. Okay, they don't care about anyone else. In the extreme, we call a person like that a psychopath. Okay, they're into sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm using that obviously euphemistically. They're into their own benefit, and anyone else is irrelevant. Okay. Okay,
is that a depiction of a psychopath?
That's a certain
sociopath.
Yeah,
it's different.
you know something I never quite understood it was a sociopath and a psychopath.
Okay.
The fact is,
but they
what I was saying
into themselves. But everyone's into themselves.
You're right. So therefore, there becomes a balancing. The
What's
fact
the
is,
difference?
right. The point is when you have no concern for the other.
So they're so into themselves they can't even see concern for another person.
If you scan their brain, it's like the part of the brain that's responsible for compassion and empathy is not activated.
Right. Now, the point is that is one possibility. There's another possibility where people sit there and say these people say no, people can't be like that. People generally are born compassionate. So what happens? They've had such a terrible experience in life that they become that way because they were treated so maliciously. That's another possibility. Okay?
Yes.
Then there's a third possibility. Okay? What's the third possibility? Third possibility is the person actually buys into values that actually support this concept. That's okay to place A over B.
So that's the training or brainwash effect.
Well, no. Let me. You see, what
the value in
so what I'm well. Let me give you an example. The first person is a person we consider to be like the most extreme example of a criminal. He's the hoodlum. Right? I'm into me, I'm into what I want, and therefore I don't care about you, and I want to do what I want to do because it's for my benefit. And that's the way we like to look at evil people, right? And therefore that person has no redeeming characteristic. There's another argument that says a person only acts in terms of hurting others because he was so hurt. Okay? It's another possibility. Okay? And basically, the reason the person is acting so violently in his own interest, or in the interest of his group, is because they feel so frustrated, that's the only thing they can do. Okay? Then there's a third possibility. The person has a value system that actually supports his perceptions. Okay? And usually when you start talking like that, that means the person actually, by having a value system, actually seems to express certain values which are positive and all of a sudden you see a curve where he's coming in from a different value. Now, I brought up the example of Hitler. People would like Hitler in the first category. They'd like to sit there and say that he just is totally the example of evil. Perfect.
Childhood,
okay.
His mother died.
Right. So then other people sit there and say, and people don't want to hear about that because that seems to give some aspect of justification.
Right.
He was a victim of some kind of circumstance. But what really people really have problems with is if they start hearing stories about Hitler and how he did certain things for the benefit of certain people, right, in his group. That in certain ways he was selfless. He was selfless for the advancement of the German people. Now the truth of the matter is that's the way the Germans actually saw him.
Right.
Right. That basically they saw him as being interested in the German people. Okay. He wasn't universal, but the fact is that now this applies to terrorism. These three examples apply to terrorism. There are people who would like to sit there and just define ISIS, for example, as just a bunch of hoodlums. They're into sex, money, that's what they want to do, and all this thing about religion is ridiculous. They're just a bunch of hoodlums. Okay? That way, we just sit there and say they're motivated by their own self-interest. Or you start having arguments for terrorism where well, they must be treated so badly, that's why they become terrorists. Now that's the argument that you usually find in the context of Israel when liberals try and talk in terms of Israel. They basically say, look how bad it must be for the Palestinians because they turned to terrorism. Right? Okay, look, they're so tough. That's a classic argument, so forth, therefore they become the victims.
Right.
They're only acting so badly because they're the victims. What does that reflect? It reflects a certain attitude about people. They really are good, they just want to do it. Then there's a third possibility, which everyone tries to stay away from. Right? Okay, which because so many people don't want to use the word religion when talking about ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because, okay,
politically incorrect. Because
this means they have a set of values, and they're doing it because they believe this is right. Okay, so I saw a clip about this. There was this ISIS fighter who went over to this woman who he was going to basically, sleep with that night. Okay, and basically went over to her and said, here's this he had a piece of paper there. This is my statement from my imam or religious leader. It says this is what Allah wants me to do, and it's the right thing to do, and that my sleeping with you is with the total okay of Allah, and this is what Allah wants me to do. So I just want you to know later tonight. You should know that when I rape you, I basically should know this is what Allah wants me to do. Okay? And the woman's like, and the guy comes over there and says, I don't want you to think I'm a bad guy. I'm following my religion. Right? This is my belief. This is what my religion wants.
This is justification for doing it.
And the guy buys it.
But right?
Yeah.
There's interconnection between the third and the first that you've mentioned here.
Yeah.
The value that person, the reason the value appealed to him in particular is because he somewhat falls into a particular category of people who are prone to believe what's convenient for them. If a person has inclination to be violent and he is given opportunity to choose the religion that approves of it, that's the religion he will choose.
Can I give you a warning?
Sorry?
Can I give you a warning?
Yeah.
Okay. Be very careful with that argument.
Okay.
Because someone's going to throw it back at you. with almost any value system. See, the
That's
fact
okay. I'm just saying I could possibly see the connection between these two things.
right, but everyone's going to say that with everything. You see, the
Anyone could draw a connection to anything. It
right.
depends on your
Torquemada. You take Torquemada, right?
Okay.
Okay. Torquemada believed that he was doing a great thing when he tortured people. Torquemada believes, it's hard being a religious person. It's hard doing the will of God. But it's absolutely necessary for me to torture the living daylights out of these Jews, try and get them to accept Jesus. It's like, I'll give you another example. If a parent doesn't want to give a blood transfusion, right? What do we do in Canada? If a parent says it's our religion not to give a our religion says not to give a blood transfusion to a kid who really needs it. What do we do?
I think they do it anyway.
Yeah, who does it?
Doctors.
Yeah, how come?
Because they have procedures, protocols they need to follow to save person life.
How do they do it legally?
Oh, the liability?
No,
They take them to court. I don't know.
They make the child a ward of the state and say, listen, we got to save the kid's life, so therefore forget their religion.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's simple forward arguments. Hey, listen, you got a nice religion, but we're talking about the kid's life, and too bad. We want to save your kid, so we're going to give them a blood transfusion, and we don't really care about your religion. Okay. Now that argument was the exact same argument, almost the exact same argument, for why Christians took Jewish children away from their parents. Okay, why? What was the Christian argument to go into a Jewish home, take all the kids and put them into a monastery? Why did they do that in the Middle Ages? You're not just talking about the temporal life of a person. You're talking about their eternal soul. They get brought up by these Jewish parents. They'll never accept Jesus, and they'll suffer eternal damnation. Right? We got to do it for the Jewish children. Right? Now, we'll leave the parents alive. They're going to be upset that they lost the kid, but we're doing it for the kids. Save their eternal soul. Right? And then we'll bring them up, and then, of course I had to do that. So I'm just saying that when you talk in terms of people having, so these people, why did they develop that value system? Because they were brought up with these values. And the question is, they never question those values. So what's the problem? The problem is you think about how you come to that conclusion. Now, the truth is that most religions of that nature, you never raise any questions with. Okay? The fact is one of the unique things of Torah is Torah basically says questioning is good. Okay? And that's because Torah does not really have a simplistic understanding of faith that most other religions have. The truth is one of the uniqueness of Torah is that faith is, or understanding of reality, which is a corollary of faith, is actually the starting point of the religion. It's not the conclusion of the religion. You see, in Christianity, whether you make it or not depends on whether you believe in Jesus. In Islam, the major statement is that you're supposed to believe that Muhammad's the prophet and all that stuff, and then you make it as a good. And then you have to do some things, but you basically make it as a good Muslim. In Judaism, okay, the starting point is accept Maimon Har Sinai and Tov, but how do you get there? And one of the things that's unique within Judaism is understand if you have legitimate questions on the truth of the religion, then those are legitimate questions. We have concepts of Tinnik Shanishra. We have concepts of a person who doesn't have the knowledge. How do you know these things? Okay, so if you basically have legitimate questions and say, "Gee, I don't know," that doesn't mean that you're necessarily wrong or evil. Okay, The point is, if you look in halacha, usually halacha begins start talking about punishments when you already accept the halacha, or accept that God said don't do this, and you still do it. Then that's when, when you basically say, I'm not listening to God, even though I know God tells me to do that. That's when you start really defining rishus, real evil. But if you're going through legitimate questions of, do I know it? Do I not know it? How do I know this? And so forth and so forth. Then you have an obligation to try and figure out the truth. But the point is that if a person basically says, I really don't buy this, and that's why the person does averas, we call that person either a shogeg or an onus, right? Because the person has legitimate questions. That's a remarkable aspect of what exists within Torah. Now, what does that mean? It means that Torah understands the depth of understanding that's necessary in order to understand what good is about. So we understand that we have to work through things. We have to understand these things. We have to understand why we have these rights and not have these rights. Most people who are dogmatic is a problem. So really, that's what I was saying before. When you were talking before and making a statement, I thought you were being a little bit more dogmatic. You were saying this person has this idea because he has this type of personality. Well, my point is that type of dogmatism is found in almost any place. Okay, and the religion can be used for that type of dogmatism. Okay, even some Jews are sadly dogmatic, right? Without understanding, okay, dogmatism itself is a problem, because how do you really understand the truth? How do you really understand what's happening? Okay, I mean, people talk in terms
of course, most people do dogmatic. It's your sole idea is that it's God and there's nothing else, there's no other question. With the majority who are following it, who are following that mentality as a religious Jewish person.
Well, the fact is that yes, the religious Jew believes in God, but the fact is that the Jew, there's an aspect of a Jew understanding the challenges that are involved with it. When a Jew truly, when I think a Jew really understands Judaism, you understand the dilemmas that are involved in any assumption that you're going to make. You're going to understand the challenges, even in terms of understanding Kodesh Baruch Hu. So many different understandings of a Kodesh Baruch Hu within the spectrum of acceptable Jewish perspectives. A lot of people had problems with the Rambam, right? A lot of people had problems with the Besht, right? The fact is that there are different perspectives.
If we have trouble understanding our Torah for ourselves, how all the more so we're going to understand the creator of such a thing.
So therefore,
if it even works that way.
Therefore, what's the challenge? Therefore, what's the challenge? The challenge is going through the process of trying to understand.
Yeah.
That's the great challenge that we face. And the truth is that what I find in my experience of learning, in my relationship with my understanding of Torah, is the idea that it gives me the methodology to try and understand. But one thing that for sure exists within Judaism, within Torah Judaism, is the attempt to quell dogmatism, which is basically saying, this is right, that's wrong. Everyone who disagrees with me is going to hell. Okay? Now, the fact is that therefore what exists is a certain amount of internal questioning. Okay? In terms of, how do I know this? How does this exist? What about this?
Well,
okay?
I mean, for that. It's not just internally, but external research.
But the point, the difference is if you're an individual who is recognizing the world is complex, that life is complex, the world is complex, okay, and the methodology of dealing with it, you understand that really what you find in Torah is a methodology of how to deal with this complexity, and accepting the complexity. It's a very different perspective.
a lot of time it can confuse more because there's so much complex, because there's so many angles and approaches.
The
that
fact is,
Jewish
therefore,
people have.
what's the problem? What's the problem with that? See, the problem you're describing, you're sitting there saying we can confuse more and so on. What's the problem? The problem is that the methodology should be how do you deal with those various different perspectives? See, what exists, what occurs a lot of times in learning, when you learn, is the understanding that there are various opinions, and there's two things that have to happen. First of all, you got to adopt a policy. Okay, if I have a situation, let's say a psak, I have to say whether something's kosher or not. Now I could tell you there might be different shitas on this and so forth, but in the end, I have to make a decision, right? Kosher or not kosher. You know what I mean? Now, the first thing you have to recognize is that you've got to make a decision, and you got to follow that decision, and then you have to recognize that other people may not share that decision with you, and they're still acceptable within the system. Okay? So, there are different opinions. Okay? But the point is you do have to make a decision. But then comes the second aspect. How do you live with the variance of opinions? Okay? And the fact that these variance of opinions can be in conflict with each other. Okay? And that's something where you know, we talk about Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and they both, even though they had different opinions, but the point is they were very adamant about following their own opinion. They were very secure about their opinions, but they also had respect for the other opinions. But that means they had a broader perspective that was able to understand the variant opinions and how you can have variance, which creates a very different understanding of how you deal with variance. It's usually like Rabbi Soloveitchik talks in terms of the dialectic, using a Kantian term. But basically he means that we are called upon at the same time sometimes to accept converging opinions at the exact same time. And there's a lot of calls upon us within Judaism to accept differing opinions. You know, or different perspectives at the exact same time. I mean, everyone talks about, let's say, for example, Yonah going to Nineveh. Okay, Yonah didn't want to go. Why didn't Yonah want to go? Because he knew Nineveh was an enemy of the Jewish people, right? And he was very much an important figure within the Jews. He loved the Jewish people, right? So the fact of the matter is, he knew Nineveh was an enemy of the Jewish people, and he thought it would be really bad if he goes to Nineveh and get them to do tshuva, and the Jews don't listen to the tshuva, or don't listen to their own Nevi'im trying to get the Jews to do tshuva. He thought that was bad. So Yonah says, I'm not going to Nineveh because that's not good that's not good for my people. Okay. What happens? He gets in trouble with God. And what does God finally teach him at the end? That, you know, Nineveh are also human beings. So therefore you should care about human beings as well. Nineveh. Now the truth of the matter is, I just saw something where someone quotes the Sefer Hasidim, who says this is an indication that Jews should try and get non-Jews to abide by the Noahide code, because you see God cared about Nineveh and sent Yonah to get the people of Nineveh to become more followers of the Noahide code. Okay? So we should also care about non-Jews and their moral development. Okay? Now, the truth is that, so this person makes that opinion, but Yonah was very, very concerned about doing that. The point is that Yonah felt that would not be in the best interests of his nationalistic interests. But the fact is that Yonah was introduced to universalistic interests. The truth is that the Jew is called upon to be a universalist and a nationalist at the same time. And universalism and nationalism sometimes are in conflict with each other. Right? There's times where your national interests mean that you're not going to favor universal interests. Like you see this in the United States right now. Right? Right? It might be that this trade is helping a lot of people and so on and so forth, but Americans are losing jobs. It's a national interest. On the other hand, you turn around and say, listen, but in terms of the world economy, what's happening is much better. Yeah, but should we care about whether someone in Colombia has a good income, or whether someone in Texas should have a good income? Well, you're concerned about nationalism and these are tremendous.
Are in need.
Yeah, and the fact is, are you a nationalist or a universalist? The truth of the matter is, it's a tremendous challenge. You know, it's not a simple answer. The fact is we do have nationalist interests. Now, the truth is that we have nationalist interests because we have interests for our community. We have family interests, right? The fact of the matter is that people don't look at this in terms of stucca. The first obligation of stucca is towards family, right? Why? Because the halakha is saying your first responsibility is the people you care about. Why? What's the difference between whether you give this food to someone in outer Borneo, or whether you give it to your cousin, because you're connected to your cousin? Why? Because there's an aspect of family. There's a value of family. You know, and the fact is that we don't understand that the depth of it. Yeah.
If one cannot take care of their own family, how can you expect them to take care of the rest of the world? You know what I mean? Like,
it has to start somewhere. You're saying it has to.
Right.
Yeah.
You
cannot be good for the rest of the world if you cannot even do your own.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. So the point is, though, but how many people? But you're already recognizing there is a value in caring for the rest of the world, and you're making a pragmatic issue. So why are you beginning with your family? Why don't you begin with some other family over there? Okay, let your own family starve, but you say that other family over. Why begin with your family? Because there's an aspect of your family which reflects that there's a value in case. It's interesting because we basically believe that if a Kodesh Baruch Hu gives you feelings for others, there's a reason for it. Okay? In our sense, the fact is that there's a tremendous difference. Like, for example, in the Christian concept of love and the Jewish concept of love, right? In the Jewish concept of love, love begins with the marital relationship, right? Christianity basically looks upon the marital relationship as a lesser form of love. Okay, that's why it's interesting, but they used to have a what do you call it? They used to have in the Middle Ages that the woman you really loved you never touched, right? Okay, because that way, because real love is when you get no personal benefit from it. But if you have relations with someone who you love,
want personal benefit.
Yeah,
you're giving to them.
But you understand that the fact is that in Judaism, the fact that the highest form of love is considered to be the romantic love between husband and wife. What you're really saying is that the desire for each other, okay, and the mutual benefit that you feel from each other is an aspect of the highest form of love. But so really, and that then grows out to the fact that the people you care for, right, are the people you have a first responsibility to. So the fact that you want to help out your family first, okay, should be in line with normal feelings for family, right? And this is all part of Kodesh Baruch Hu's plan, that the way you create the world, okay, someone said this to me a long time ago, that I saw it in the Sefer, that what really is the growth of a community within the Jewish perspective? It's the extension of self. See, Christianity talks in terms of selfish and selfless. And let love should be selfless. So basically you show no personal interest in love, and it should be totally selfless. Okay? I give to you and I don't want anything back. Right? Because you're totally self.
That's of that as well.
Right. Wait a sec. But what really is the essence of Jewish love? The essence of Jewish love, and that's what I'm talking about, is the extension of self. that you extend yourself to, first of all, your spouse. So ishto kagufo, right? That your wife is like you, okay? And that you actually are extending self. And then you extend yourself out to your immediate family, and then the extended family and community. And this means that when you feel affection for another, that's where it's supposed to go, because you're extending self. And then eventually you extend self in the ultimate extreme to the entire world, because you recognize that the entire world is really one unit of humanity. But you have to build it up. The fact is, that's an aspect of your emotions do tie to reality and so forth and so forth. But the fact is that really what you're doing is you're dealing with your own emotions. You're caring for others. How do you put them together? How do you understand them? There is an aspect of selflessness as well when you give in terms of aspects of chesed or whatever. But the point is you begin to understand that there's a tension here. God created me with a self-interest. God created me with caring for my family. God also tells me to care about others. And the fact is that in that dialectic, I have to come up with some answers of how do I create the structure to be able to deal with life. And I understand that idea. Nationalism versus universalism, all those issues. Now, the truth is, getting back to what I was saying with the terrorism issue, is that there are people who want to define terrorists just as hoodlums. Right? So they never want to talk about religion and terrorism. They never want to talk, but they just want to say they're hoodlums. Okay? And because that makes it easier for them to understand why they're doing what they're doing. But usually, it doesn't explain what they're really doing. The second thing that comes up is it must be terrible what happened to them. But then you have your challenge. Okay? There's a lot of people who became terrorists that their personal life wasn't so bad. Okay? There's a third development of terrorism. And that's because people have developed theories. And the theories they develop, okay, somehow fit into some kind of thing that appeals to them or whatever. You're right, it might be self-serving in terms of what they're interested in, but they feel they have to have some justification for it. Or they basically are trying to find some way of creating a structure they can live with. And the most ridiculous conclusions that people don't understand about Nazism, the Nazis in that it actually served Germany. So these people were extreme nationalists. And they basically said, this isn't the best interest of the German people. Look at our economy, it's growing, and so forth and so forth. And they basically downplayed everything else. And there were people who said that. People who said, basically, listen, this is the best interest of Germany and Germans. Yeah, there may be some consequences. So, it's not so good to the Jews. Okay, but we got to take care of the Germans first. Okay, and they actually turned it around into some kind of value structure. Okay, and they talked in terms of values. One of the most powerful scenes I ever saw that I still think about, and it's extremely frightening. Is you ever see Schindler's List? The movie Schindler's List?
Yeah.
Okay. The Nazi who ran that camp and so forth and so forth, who basically was, real despicable Nazi. Before he was hung, right? Do you know what he did? What?
He said.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The fact of the matter is that he pledged his allegiance. He made a strong statement. This is my value system.
Basically means he did not have any remorse whatsoever.
Because
he died believing what he believed in.
Right. What he believed in, therefore you understand that these people actually have value systems that justify. They're not just into sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that's what makes them so frightening. And that's why I told you the case with the ISIS guy. This guy comes in there and basically he has a little bit of questions here. I don't want you to think I'm an evil person. I just want you to know that really God wants me to rape you. That's really what he was saying to her. I couldn't believe, I'm watching her. I'm watching him sitting there saying, God, for my should know that this is what God wants. And the fact is that, wait a second. Now, how does someone come to that, and so forth and so forth? Is it self-serving? Is it not self-serving? But the point is the person is actually developing some kind of value perspective. And the fact is that how do you challenge that value perspective? That's where questioning becomes significant. And that's where dogmatism becomes the great concern. And the fact is that's always a concern that we always have to have, and that's something I believe that is fundamental to Torah. Torah does not like dogmatism. The point is you got to think. Okay, and the reason I would say the Torah doesn't like dogmatism is because you can't understand what the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants from you within Torah unless you're questioning.
Then why do they have set rules?
Where do they have set rules?
Well, upon August's argument, they had to come up with some kind of conclusion, because otherwise people don't know what to do,
right.
where to go.
Okay, so the fact is, so now you have issues that really did exist with every codification. The fact of the matter is, with every codification from the Rambam, where the Rambam said people need set rules because they don't have the ability to figure it out on their own, people basically said, yeah, but there's a problem with set rules. That's what happened with the argument. The point is that people, the point is people need to use set rules like that to understand. Listen, I use set rules because I obviously don't know what I'm talking about. The thing that I find the most remarkable thing is people like. I remember once standing in line at a kosher store. It was before Pesach, and this woman was yelling about how she's buying only these paper towels, because these paper towels don't have cornstarch, and this is what the rabbi said. And she was really very adamant, like, I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing what the rabbi said, and I'm doing the paper towel. And I'm telling you, I say, listen, lady, you have no idea what you're talking about. You don't understand why those people who say you don't care about cornstarch really don't care about cornstarch in terms of Pesach towels. You have no understanding of the underlying halachic perspectives. You're just sitting there and you want to come across like you know what you're doing. Sit there and say, listen, I'm an ignoramus. I don't know what I'm talking about, so I got to do what they tell me to do because I have no other idea. Okay? So please don't enter a conversation with me. Oh, I have respect for that. I have respect you to sit there and say, listen, I have no idea of what I'm doing, so therefore I have to follow the set rule. But everyone walks around. That's one of the reasons I get into trouble. Because I go up to someone like that and say, oh, really? You don't know there's another opinion like this. Oh, really? And then people get upset with me. Because,
people like clear
what?
Clear answers,
Because people like that clear-cut answer, and people like that, and people like have the sense that they know what they're doing and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, and therefore people like dogmatism. Okay? Because it's nice and simple.
It is.
And
an easy way to live.
Right. Basically. And the fact is that when you begin to understand that there are real issues involved, that's why with almost any statement, usually, quote both sides of the issue, and then you can start talking about. Now you have to make a decision. I'm not denying you have to make a decision, but there's a very different reality when you make a decision out of I only see one side versus I see the different sides. I understand that if I go with this side, I lose out this way.
Oh, you make an informed decision now. Is that what it is?
It's an informed decision.
It's like kind of like when you don't know something, you research and you see all these different opinions, and then you basically have to make your decision. And like if you don't know about something.
Yeah, but you know something. The thing that happens with that. is that it's just not a matter of just doing research and knowing the variant opinions. One of the issues in halacha is knowing how to make a decision with various information. Like one of the problems is a lot of people say, "Can you give me the different information, and I want to make a decision about something." The problem is that the methodology of halacha is not just knowing the different viewpoints; it's also knowing how to make a decision amongst the different viewpoints, and that's a little bit more difficult than just knowing the different viewpoints. I've had a lot of people sit there and say, "I want to make an informed decision. Tell me the different shittas." I said, even if I tell you the different shittas, doesn't mean you have the ability to even think about how to paskin, because there's a whole methodology of how you work with the different shittas, with the different viewpoints. And the fact is that it takes work. And the truth of the matter is people don't recognize the first work is choosing the person that you want to learn from. That itself is part of the process. And if you think you're going to, if you sit there and say, "I choose that person based upon the fact that I can relate to them," yes, a Seilach Harav is connected to you, your subjectivity. If you think you're making a decision about who your rabbi is going to be based upon some objective standard, that's not a Seilach Harav. Seilach Harav means you have to make that decision for you of who's going to be your teacher and who you're going to turn to ask questions based upon certain methodology and so forth and so forth. But the fact is recognize that that's part of the decision, and another person will make a decision in other ways, and so forth. So the truth is that in the end, you have to know what decisions you're making, and then you go through the process of studying and so forth and so forth, and understand what your decision points are and so forth. Right? I've been in situations, and I just had a shiloh last night. I was talking to another Rav, and I joked around with him. I said, "Okay, we're at a point in time. Okay, we got somewhere back and forth in the shiloh, whatever it is, doesn't matter." I said, "Okay, answering this question is beyond my pay grade. Okay, you better go ask. We better get someone who can deal with this." There's certain questions, like they're not. It's not my. Yeah. That's I'm not in the category who can paskin on that issue. That's why you have different. On the other hand, in other issues, I can paskin, and that sometimes has to do with my own subjective feeling of whether I feel I have enough knowledge, and if I feel I have enough of the ability to make that decision. But that all involves a dialectic. It all involves an analyzing. It all involves understanding, and that's something that's inherent in Judaism. And when people start throwing out statements in a dogmatic fashion, that's where you run into problems. Now, are there certain statements that are pretty straightforward? Yes, Judaism does believe in God. Okay? So the point is what does that really mean? And how do you understand God? Okay? And all these variety of issues. Anyways, that's really what I wanted to throw out here tonight. It has a lot to do with where you're coming from a little bit, in the sense that so many people throw out so many conclusions and so many final statements that you have questions with them because no one ever dealt with what are the assumptions that are based on, what's the analysis, and no one understood that you, on a certain level, have to be a thinker. Okay, in Judaism, you have to be involved. The point is that I can speak from the value system, which I am adhering to and promoting or whatever, is that it calls upon individuals to be involved in the process, which means not taking things for granted. See, I find this just goes back quickly, and one of those is the whole thing with terrorism. Okay, I find it that you look at the facts and you see that there suicide bombings in Pakistan again, trying to target Christians, and this and that and so forth, and yet there are people who take certain positions vis-a-vis Israel that it must be that they're acting this way because they're in so much pain. And you look at them and say, so why are they acting that way in Pakistan? You know, what's the pain they have over there? What's happening over here? What are you talking about? And the fact of the matter is that it's not that reason. Now, does that mean that the reason doesn't exist in Israel? I'm not good. I think that a lot of the pain that exists in Israel comes about from problems in the Palestinian side, not necessarily what the Israelis do. But the fact is that the world wants to hook onto that as a reason because it can't deal with a value system that they can't understand as a value system, because a value system is people saying this is right. They're not just saying I'm into it because I want to get my pleasure. They're saying this is right, and that people have a real hard problem with. But one of the reasons people have a real problem with it is because if those guys can think that they're right and they're doing is right, then how do I know what I'm thinking is actually right? I'm going to end on this note. I once did a program. It was a big program actually in Yom Kippur where I took some people out and during Musaf and we did a sort of give and take. And I asked them the question of whether they believed that Adolf Hitler Yimach Shemo thought of himself as evil. Okay? And most people in the room basically said no. Okay? One guy said, yeah, Hitler knew he was evil. He knew it. He knew he was doing evil, and that was it. And what I pointed out is the guy who said that Hitler knew he was doing evil, he recognized the problem. If Hitler thought he was doing right, then how do you know that you're correct in your thoughts of what's right? Because if you think Hitler acted that way because he believed he had a knowledge of good and evil and he was doing good, then how do you know that your decision of good and evil is correct? Right? We all make decisions on good and evil. Right? Well, how do you know that your decision of good and evil is a correct one? Well, most people would say, because everyone sort of knows what good and evil is. It's simple. Okay. And that's what the guy who said, yes, Hitler knew he was doing evil because he wanted to maintain... He sort of figured out the problem with saying Hitler didn't think he was doing evil. Because he thinks it's pretty straightforward to know good and evil. But when you run into someone doing such evil and thinking he's doing good, your whole definition of good and evil fall apart. Your whole understanding of morality and ethics fall apart. How do you know that your decision is actually good? And the fact is, right? You're already giving a certain view of good and evil. Okay, that's one definition of good and evil.
It has a certain validity to it.
Yeah, so you're basically saying that it's a pragmatic definition of good. Who says that that's true either? But the fact of the matter is, when you start asking those type of questions, you start having a lot of challenges. So most people want to walk around saying, I know what's good, I know what's evil, okay, and the guy doing evil also knows what's good and evil, therefore it's a nice simple argument. But when you hear a person actually doing evil thinking he's doing good, you really are thrown off. And ISIS presents that challenge nowadays. So no one wants to deal with it. No one wants to hear a guy sitting there and saying, you know, I'm going to do a real good thing today, I'm going to rape this woman. No, they don't want to hear a person saying that because the guy thinks he's doing good. What kind of craziness is that? So then, how do I know? The truth of the matter is once you start asking those kind of questions, then you have to really start dealing with understanding reality. And that really is where Torah really enters into the mix. What I find is the great thing about Torah is that it doesn't shy away from those questions. It's basically dealing with it. And the fact is that it doesn't give the same answers, but it basically deals with the fact that we're going through the process. And it's in the process that you really find really find the divine nature of Torah. Okay?